A female tourist visiting the area around the 38th parallel accidentally had her hat blown over to the other side of the border. She instantly froze, not daring to step forward to retrieve it. At that moment, a soldier from the north stepped up, picked up the hat, and dusted it off. In the dead silence, he reached out to return it. The other side immediately took the hat. The atmosphere at this time did not seem as tense as imagined, but when another person rushed over to take a picture, they were instantly stopped by South Korean guards and quickly escorted away. Regardless, the security measures here remain incredibly strict. They inherently share the same bloodline, but because of a single borderline, they have become face-to-face enemies. In this place, not only could a flying fly get shot, but even a shadow crossing the line would receive a warning.
야, 그림자 넘어왔어.
Hearing this, the person on the other side immediately took a sharp step back, because this is one of the most tense borders on the planet. But at noon that day, a South Korean guard deliberately spat toward the other side. Faced with this obvious provocation, the North Korean soldier responded with a spit of his own. This area was supposed to be strictly guarded, but it ended up turning into a childish spitting match, to the point where both sides couldn't help but laugh. The cause of this strange incident stemmed from a night a few days prior, when South Korean soldier Lee Soo-hyuk and his squad were out on reconnaissance. Because the reeds were too thick and it was too dark, they accidentally stepped into North Korean territory. To avoid a serious dispute, the commander immediately ordered a retreat, but because they withdrew so hastily, they left behind Lee Soo-hyuk, who was relieving himself nearby. Realizing something was wrong, he hurried back, but accidentally stepped on a landmine right under his foot. He could not defuse the mine himself. The radio also could not pick up any signals. As Lee Soo-hyuk was in despair, he suddenly heard a strange noise from afar. He immediately went on high alert, raising his gun ready to defend himself. Fortunately, it was just a small dog running out, but before he could breathe a sigh of relief, the dog's barking drew the North Korean soldiers over. The two locked eyes for a brief moment and instantly drew their guns. Lee Soo-hyuk was a beat faster, leaving the North Korean soldier with no choice but to raise his hands and surrender. But before he could relax, he was restrained from behind by another soldier. The gun in his hand was snatched away in the blink of an eye, out of fear that he would shoot. Lee Soo-hyuk hurriedly told them about the mine under his foot. Hearing this, the northern side did not dare act recklessly either. It turned out, the two of them were just looking for their lost dog. Therefore, they did not intend to give a hard time to an enemy soldier who had accidentally wandered across the border. However, as they were about to leave, Lee Soo-hyuk suddenly called out to them loudly. A fierce survival instinct made him cry and beg them not to leave and to save him. Even though the two sides belonged to irreconcilable enemy factions, as the gentle night breeze swept by, the kind-hearted soldier Yoo Jin-ho decided to risk his life to help. He carefully defused the dangerous landmine under Lee Soo-hyuk's foot, and even gave him the mine to keep as a souvenir. Lee Soo-hyuk also gave them his lighter to light a cigarette. Before he could even say a sincere thank you, the other side quietly took a drag and left. A friendship considered taboo by both nations began to blossom amidst the reeds swaying in the wind. Soon, winter arrived, and thick snow covered the mountains and forests. Once, two patrol squads ran into each other on the mountain, and among them were two familiar faces. What surprised Lee Soo-hyuk was that the gentle older soldier Yoo Jin-ho did not show any wariness toward them, and even exchanged cigarettes with the southern squad leader. And what made Lee Soo-hyuk even happier was that Yoo Jin-ho also recognized the gaze looking at him. His face full of joy made Lee Soo-hyuk secretly smile with excitement inside. In that moment, he clearly felt the blood connection of their fellow countrymen. From that day on, the weather gradually became milder. The two also frequently met while standing guard at the border. Sometimes, they would even secretly tease each other. Yoo Jin-ho humorously reminded Lee Soo-hyuk not to let his shadow cross the borderline. Lee Soo-hyuk also played along with him knowingly. Since he still had not been able to say thank you directly for what happened before, Lee Soo-hyuk wrote a letter and put it in a cigarette box. He threw the cigarette box with the letter over to the guard post on the other side. The box soared through the night sky like a shooting star, seemingly tearing through the boundary between the two countries. From then on, the two began to communicate this way, even calling each other brothers. They shared their favorite music tapes and books. But one night, Lee Soo-hyuk crossed the border, walked straight up, and opened the door to the Northern Guard post. That moment left the two North Korean soldiers stunned. Normally, bullets would have flown long ago. It turned out that the other North Korean soldier, named Jong Woo-jin, had joked in a letter, telling Lee Soo-hyuk to come over and say thanks in person. Little did he expect this honest guy would actually do it. Because it was not a serious invitation, Lee Soo-hyuk planned to head back immediately, but Jong Woo-jin quickly held him back. He had broken through over half a century of painful separation, smashing the final shackles preventing the reunification of their fatherland. Those passionate words instantly erased the remaining trace of guilt in the hearts of all three men. After making sure no one outside was watching, they slipped into the basement, used a lunchbox as a shot glass, and set off firecrackers to celebrate. Faced with these compatriots who were both familiar and strange, they seemed to have endless stories to share. Through their conversations, Lee Soo-hyuk realized that the North Korean soldiers he had heard about were not as cold and ruthless as his superiors had claimed. The three men temporarily put aside their political opposition, enjoying a rare moment of peace and brotherhood. But when they got drunk, they could not avoid showing off. Jong Woo-jin proudly patted his chest, saying that in the North, they had to serve in the military for 13 years, while South Korean soldiers only served for 2. So how could they have the guts to compare? Lee Soo-hyuk, known as the fastest draw in his unit, refused to be outdone. Lee Soo-hyuk suddenly drew his gun, making Jong Woo-jin jump in shock. However, Yoo Jin-ho, a seasoned battlefield veteran, remained unusually calm. He pretended to borrow Lee Soo-hyuk's gun to demonstrate, then took advantage of a moment of distraction to instantly load it and point it straight at Lee Soo-hyuk. Lee Soo-hyuk, who had never stepped onto a battlefield, was instantly frozen. He was so tense, he trembled, unable to speak a word. Yoo Jin-ho then warned him in a serious tone that in war, speed is not the most important thing. The most important thing is to keep your calm and courage. These words left a deep impression on Lee Soo-hyuk. Yoo Jin-ho also told him to remember the landmine he helped defuse that day, implying that on the battlefield, what saves lives is not recklessness but composure. To thank Yoo Jin-ho for the valuable lesson, Lee Soo-hyuk gifted him an American lighter. Jong Woo-jin was a bit upset because he did not get a gift. Of course, Lee Soo-hyuk had not forgotten. He gave Jong Woo-jin the color magazine he loved the most. When the three of them were enjoying the gifts together, the dog outside suddenly barked loudly. A North Korean officer had arrived for a routine inspection. Seeing Yoo Jin-ho slouching lazily, he immediately kicked him down into the ditch. Right at that moment, the dog barked loudly again. Jong Woo-jin immediately broke out in a cold sweat, because Lee Soo-hyuk was still hiding in their post at that time. Fortunately, the officer did not step inside to inspect but only ordered Jong Woo-jin to take the dog to be slaughtered and cooked the next day. Hearing that his beloved dog was about to be killed, a heartbroken Jong Woo-jin had no choice but to sneak it over to the south, but the dog was deeply attached to its owner. No matter how hard Jong Woo-jin tried to shoo it away, it kept finding its way back to them. In the following days, whenever Lee Soo-hyuk was on duty, he would use his binoculars to observe the Northern Guard post. At this time, his comrade Nam-sung, standing next to him, could not help but tease that he only had 3 months left until discharge, and by then, Nam-sung would be bored to death talking to himself. Suddenly, a bold thought flashed through Lee Soo-hyuk's mind, thinking maybe he could introduce his northern friends to him. But after hesitating, he swallowed his words, because the friends he mentioned were Yoo Jin-ho and Jong Woo-jin on the other side of the front line. When night fell, the two continued their night shift. Nam-sung woke up and could not find Lee Soo-hyuk anywhere, so he stepped outside to look and found Lee Soo-hyuk standing in the middle of the bridge. It seemed this could no longer be hidden. Finally, Lee Soo-hyuk confessed everything and led Nam-sung right up to the demarcation line. The two friends from the other side were already waiting. Nam-sung stood right at the boundary line, confused about what to do, wondering if they were not the enemy. Lee Soo-hyuk then repeated Jong Woo-jin's famous quote about how they had broken through over half a century of painful separation, smashing the final shackles preventing the reunification of the fatherland. While Nam-sung was still hesitating, Yoo Jin-ho stepped up to him and hugged him tightly so he could feel the warmth from a fellow countryman. Just like that, Nam-sung also became friends with the two northern soldiers. Although this bond made him feel relieved, befriending the enemy still made Nam-sung anxious. Lee Soo-hyok then comforted him, saying that actually, there are no enemies in this world, just compatriots standing on different front lines. Besides, they were just guards and had no important military secrets to leak anyway. The person on the other side was like reflecting sunlight. A ray of warmth suddenly pierced through Namsung's heart. And so, the people who were originally considered sworn enemies carelessly gathered together, joking around every night. They used bullets to play games of catching lions, grasping their brotherhood and throwing away their antagonistic hatred. During those relaxing nights, they could be true to themselves and share their everyday stories. Jung Woo-jin had a wife and a young son. Lee Soo-hyok had a beautiful girlfriend. Namsung even taught Jeong Woo-jin how to shine shoes. While Woo Jin-ho was obsessed with South Korean snacks, Lee Soo-hyok often brought him pastries. Every time he tasted the cake, Woo Jin-ho could not help but sigh. He wondered when the North would be able to make such delicious cakes. Then one day, Lee Soo-hyok tentatively asked Woo Jin-ho if he wanted to come live in the South. It was just a casual question, but it touched everyone's ultimate taboo, because for steadfast soldiers, the thought of defecting to the enemy side is forbidden. Lee Soo-hyok also immediately realized his slip of the tongue. Woo Jin-ho spat out the cake in his mouth, affirming his stance that there would come a day when their North would also make delicious cakes like this. Saying that, he stuffed the spat-out cake back into his mouth and continued eating. They were all loyal to their countries, but they also deeply cherished this hard-won friendship. So, from then on, they avoided mentioning sensitive topics. Whenever the moon was bright and the stars were sparse, the forest at the border echoed with joyous laughter. It was a joy only men could understand, and the friendship between the four grew stronger and unbreakable. They thought the four of them would be together like this forever. A few days later, in the South Korean barracks, alarm sirens suddenly blared. They received military intelligence that the North Korean army was massing large forces along the border. South Korea immediately raised its war alert to the highest level. Soldiers were simultaneously deployed to the front line for support. Lee Soo-hyok and Namsung looked at each other with deep concern, terrified of a war breaking out, and worried for the safety of their northern friends. However, when they arrived, they discovered it was just a military drill by the North. Although no real battle occurred, this signaled the increasingly tense relations between the two sides. Seeing the minefields continuously detonating on the other side, along with sparks flying all over the sky, Lee Soo-hyok, for the safety of the whole group, suggested temporarily stopping their visits for a while and not going over to the north, but Namsung replied that it would be Jong Woo-jin's birthday in a few days. Furthermore, Lee Soo-hyok was also about to be discharged. If they did not share a farewell drink together, it would be a huge regret in life. Therefore, after the situation settled down, the four gathered together as before. Later, Lee Soo-hyok also revealed the reason for this trip was to say goodbye. All four clearly showed reluctance to part ways. They even exchanged contact addresses. Everyone hoped that after the war, they might meet again someday. Right after was an incredibly emotional moment. Lee Soo-hyok wore a North Korean military hat, while Jong Woo-jin wore a South Korean military hat. Lee Soo-hyok stood between the two, taking a group photo to preserve the most precious memory of his life. When taking the picture, they even had to carefully adjust the angle to hide the image of the supreme leader behind them. In that moment, there was no longer any distance. They were like a real family. Namsung also brought out a painting kit to give Jeong Woo-jin as a birthday present, because he knew Jeong Woo-jin's greatest passion was painting. Just one call of brother was enough to make tears irrepressible. They sat down together, planning to smoke one last cigarette before leaving. Namsung was about to open the door to get some fresh air, but the moment he opened it, he froze on the spot. The smiles on Jong Woo-jin and Woo Jin-ho's lips also vanished, because right in front of the door was the North Korean officer conducting an inspection. He immediately drew his gun and pointed it straight at Namsung. Namsung was so scared his legs gave out, and then he and Lee Soo-hyok instantly raised their guns in a standoff. The officer glanced over the party table, saw the alcohol, cigarettes, and gifts, and flew into a rage, ordering Woo Jin-ho to be punished. Despite such a tense situation, Woo Jin-ho maintained his composure, but Jong Woo-jin could not do the same. Pressured by the officer, he also had to draw his gun, making the situation as tight as a bowstring ready to snap. If this continued, someone would definitely lose their life. Finally, Woo Jin-ho stepped up to mediate between both sides, and they slowly lowered their guns. That night, a light drizzle fell continuously, seemingly endless, until a sudden gunshot rang out, shattering the silence. The North Korean officer slowly collapsed onto the cold snow. Immediately after, soldiers from both sides rushed over, escalating the incident into a massive clash. The peaceful dark night suddenly turned into chaos. In this shootout, aside from the officer who was shot dead, Jeong Woo-jin was also killed. Woo Jin-ho was shot in the shoulder, and Lee Soo-hyuk was injured in the leg. Nam-sung alone was uninjured, so no one knew he was also there. This incident severely worsened the already tense situation between the two Koreas. In their official reports, both sides provided contradictory statements. The South Korean side claimed that night, when Lee Soo-hyuk went outside to relieve himself, he was captured by North Korean soldiers. Afterward, despite being tied up, Lee Soo-hyuk fought against 3 men, eventually getting shot in the leg before escaping back to the south. Meanwhile, the North asserted that Lee Soo-hyuk had trespassed into their guard post unprovoked, suddenly opened fire, killing an officer and a rookie, and after injuring a Jin-ho, he fled. The two sides could not sit down together to resolve this headless case. Therefore, Switzerland decided to step in and send Major Sophie, a Swiss-Korean female officer, to investigate the incident. The investigation committee required her to maintain absolute neutrality, as she could not afford to offend either side. The process of the investigation was what mattered, not the final result. However, when Sophie came for interrogation, Lee Soo-hyuk remained silent, refusing to say a single word. He would rather take the blame and be thrown in jail than reveal that he had befriended northern soldiers, because fraternizing with the enemy in the military was a grave crime. Even Woo Jin-ho refused to cooperate with the investigation. Based on the crime scene, the North Korean officer was shot 8 times, Jeong Woo-jin was shot twice, and Woo Jin-ho was shot once. That meant Lee Soo-hyuk fired a total of 11 rounds, but only 10 bullets were recovered at the scene. That meant 1 bullet had simply vanished, without a trace. Clearly, someone had deliberately concealed evidence from the scene. Furthermore, the 2 shots that hit the North Korean officer, one in the chest, one right in the heart, clearly showed it was an intentional, point-blank kill shot. Continuing the investigation, Sophie discovered that the gun Lee Soo-hyuk held the night of the incident actually bore Nam-sung's serial number, while the gun in Nam-sung's possession belonged to Lee Soo-hyuk. Moreover, blood belonging to Jeong Woo-jin was found on the gun Nam-sung was holding. This proved that on the night of the incident, Nam-sung was not only present at the scene but had also swapped guns with Lee Soo-hyuk. So what on earth was the purpose of this exchange? As more and more evidence was presented, Nam-sung could no longer keep his composure. When he heard he would have to take a polygraph test, he suddenly became violently agitated, grabbed his gun, and tried to shoot himself to end his life, only to find there were no bullets inside. In a panic, he smashed the glass window and threw himself out. At this time, Lee Soo-hyuk was on the floor below for questioning. He witnessed Nam-sung's face flash past the window above, along with the truth that Nam-sung was determined to take to his grave. His body hit the ground hard, ending all hope. This caused Lee Soo-hyuk to suffer a complete mental breakdown. He lunged forward and choked Sophie tightly, but was eventually subdued by the soldiers. Nam-sung's death greatly outraged the South Korean side. They started pressuring Sophie, demanding the interrogation be postponed. Although Sophie was also heartbroken over the tragedy, she knew she was very close to the truth, so she decided to take a tougher approach. Defying the heavy pressure, Sophie organized a confrontational interrogation, bringing both Lee Soo-hyuk and Woo Jin-ho to the scene at the same time. The moment their eyes met held too many complex emotions. Both understood that this interrogation would determine their own fates. When Sophie presented the testimonies of both sides, they both affirmed there were no issues and nothing needed correcting. Immediately after, she brought out a reconstruction model of the crime scene, arranging everyone's positions when the murders occurred, and then played the video of Nam-sung's interrogation before his suicide. Sophie concluded that Nam-sung's suicide to avoid the lie detector test was an indirect admission of guilt. She proposed reopening the investigation. Seeing the image of his close brother losing control in the video, Lee Soo-hyuk's mental state also began to collapse. It seemed he was about to lose it and blurt out the truth. Right at that moment, Woo Jin-ho suddenly flew into a rage and flipped the table. He lunged over, pinning Lee Soo-hyuk to the floor, shouting loudly about hitting him hard. But the people present intervened in time. After Yoo Jin-ho's disturbance, the confrontational interrogation had to be ended early. Sophie did not gather any useful evidence either. Her superiors handed over a file related to Sophie's father. It turned out her father was once a prisoner of war in North Korea and later moved to another country to live. The superiors believed this special background could cause Sophie to lose her objectivity and make the investigation results unfair. Therefore, they decided to revoke Sophie's investigative authority this time. However, Sophie still tried to argue to defend her stance. She insisted that she only needed 3 days to make Lee Soo-hyuk confess and uncover the whole truth. But her superiors told her that the truth was not needed here. The way to maintain peace here was to hide that very truth. Ultimately, the High Command handed Sophie a plane ticket, demanding she return to Switzerland in 2 days. Sophie had to accept being stripped of her investigative rights, but she was still tormented by lingering doubts. So before leaving, she once again called Lee Soo-hyuk in for a meeting. This time, Sophie presented more compelling evidence. In Jeong Woo-jin's sketchbook, there was a portrait of Lee Soo-hyuk's girlfriend. This was enough to prove the relationship between the 4 men was not simple at all. She then pulled out 2 different investigation reports, saying she could help cover up the entire truth from before and ensure neither side would be implicated. On the condition that Lee Soo-hyuk must confess everything, otherwise, she would hand all the evidence over to her successor to continue the investigation. Next, Sophie promised that as long as Lee Soo-hyuk told the truth, she would find a way to ensure Yoo Jin-ho's safety. Hearing this condition, out of concern for his brother, Lee Soo-hyuk confessed the entire relationship between the 4 of them, as well as everything that happened that night. That night, when Yoo Jin-ho asked everyone to drop their guns, the radio suddenly switched to the next rock song. The sudden noise startled everyone. At the exact same time, the North Korean officer's walkie-talkie signaled. As he reached out to grab the walkie-talkie, a loud gunshot rang out, tearing through the night. Nam-sung thought he was about to draw his gun, so he instantly fired the first shot. That moment threw everyone into chaos. Jeong Woo-jin also panicked and drew his gun again, but Nam-sung was faster, firing a second shot that hit Jeong Woo-jin. Right after that, Lee Soo-hyuk also opened fire. However, when pointing the gun at Woo Jin-ho, the gun suddenly jammed. This saved Woo Jin-ho's life. Just then, Jeong Woo-jin managed to fire a shot right into Lee Soo-hyuk's right leg. Nam-sung completely lost control, his mind going blank. The brother he had just sentimentally exchanged gifts with had now become a soul under his gun barrel. Immediately after, he fired 6 consecutive shots into the officer. In his panic, Nam-sung could no longer distinguish friend from foe, even pointing his gun toward the injured Lee Soo-hyuk. Only Yoo Jin-ho remained calm. He gently took the gun from Nam-sung's hands, stood before the body of his dead brother and his old friend. Without hesitation, Yoo Jin-ho pointed the gun at his own commanding officer. Then, he wiped the gun clean and handed it back to Lee Soo-hyuk. Woo Jin-ho immediately helped the panicked Lee Soo-hyuk stand up. This was also why Nam-sung's gun ended up in his hands. Right after, Woo Jin-ho told Nam-sung to say he had never been there, and that Lee Soo-hyuk was only kidnapped and then escaped. He told them not to look back and just leave as quickly as possible. But right after that, Woo Jin-ho called Lee Soo-hyuk back and told him to shoot him once. Waiting until both men had safely retreated, Woo Jin-ho gathered all the belongings they had left behind along with the radio and threw them into the river. Because one of the bullets Lee Soo-hyuk fired was lodged in the radio, the scene was missing one bullet casing. When gunshots echoed from the border area, both barracks instantly sounded emergency alarms. Soon after, soldiers from both sides quickly rushed to the scene. Because he was so terrified, Nam-sung abandoned the injured Lee Soo-hyuk and fled. The wounded Lee Soo-hyuk lay collapsed on the bridge, feeling every drop of freezing rain pouring down on him. Hearing the sound of bullets tearing through the wind past his ears, swallowing up everything about their memories and friendship, it seemed that moment had frozen his entire life. Woo Jin-ho also joined the ranks, firing continuously. Finally, Lee Soo-hyuk was shielded by his comrades and evacuated from the scene. Everything that night happened so fast. Looking back now, Lee Soo-hyuk still felt it was like a distant dream. After hearing the story, Sophie was deeply moved. She had guessed that Namsang was also there that night, but she never imagined the bond between the four men was so profound. Afterward, Sophie went to see Yu Junho, and from his words, confirmed the entire truth. She asked him if he could forgive his southern friends. Yu Junho only replied that brothers are brothers forever. Then, Sophie asked if he had any final messages. Yu Junho glanced at the guard standing next to him, and merely said he wanted to return the lighter to Lee Soo-hyuk. He also asked Sophie to tell Lee Soo-hyuk that he should quit smoking. Hearing Yu Junho's words of care, Lee Soo-hyuk felt both moved and guilty, but Sophie's next words made him feel as if he had fallen into an icy abyss. It turned out the shot Namsang fired at Jung Woojin that day only hit his finger and then lodged into the radio, and it was Lee Soo-hyuk's shot that was the actual cause of Jung Woojin's death. Lee Soo-hyuk felt like he had been jolted awake from a coma. Regardless of whose memory was right or wrong, his heart was still filled with a sense of betrayal. Because right at that moment, he had pulled the trigger while pointing the gun at Yu Junho. Even though the gun jammed, he still tried to pull the trigger a second time, and that was an unforgivable mistake. Right at this moment, South Korean soldiers arrived to take Lee Soo-hyuk away. They were going to escort him to the hospital for treatment. As Lee Soo-hyuk walked down the stairs, Sophie suddenly realized the lighter still had not been given to him. She instantly felt a bad premonition and hurriedly chased after him, but it was all too late. Carrying a heavy burden of guilt, Lee Soo-hyuk could not forgive himself. He suddenly snatched a gun from a soldier, fell to his knees, his face full of agony. He looked toward where Namsang had thrown himself off, put the barrel of the gun into his mouth, and pulled the trigger. Another restless night. Beside Lee Soo-hyuk was flowing red blood and ultimate remorse. Memories flashed continuously like a fast-forwarding movie, suddenly bringing him back to a peaceful afternoon. Yu Junho had once picked up a hat blown away by the wind and handed it directly to a South Korean tourist. That action made the tourist happily take a commemorative photo. Lee Soo-hyuk had run over at that time to stop the man, but that accidental photo was like a stroke of destiny, capturing all four of them in the same frame. It was also their only group photo. That black and white photo not only preserved the friendship they once had but also proved that the blood ties between them would never be separated by a dividing line just a few meters apart. This is a silent indictment of the tragedy of a divided nation, where soldiers on two ends of a front line speak the same language, share the same dream of peace, yet are forced to point their guns at each other. Every look, every smile shared between them in the dark of night is proof that humanity is not erased by battle lines. But that very truth was suffocated in reports rewritten for political stability. The movie is not simply an investigative story about a murder, but the pain of an entire nation when the border is only one step away, yet enough to separate a lifetime. Only for an accidental group photo to become the surviving witness of a friendship buried by history. The film reminds us that unity is the only path to survival, only when we realize our compatriots are not the enemy. Only when placing humanity above hatred can we walk through war without losing ourselves. If you also felt that pain, please share your thoughts to help spread the value of the truth about humanity and the nation. This is the end of the movie. Thank you for watching.